Welcome back to our Activity 2.4 Disease Tracker app. Today we're going to go ahead and take the user face that we have previously created and go ahead and program all the components that were added so that we can store data. So the first thing we're going to look at is our add button and what actually happens when that add button is clicked. So we have two different components that we've added within that horizontal arrangement. The first being your month spinner, and you can see that your elements from string here contain all of the months from the year. And then we also have an amount text box, which will allow us to enter an amount of people that have contracted the flu during that month, and hopefully that information gets stored. So we'll go ahead and look at that. We'll also look at how we can clean it up a little bit if, say, somebody does click that add button and there is no message or no number stored in that box when the add button is clicked. So let's go ahead and take a look at our block view, and you will notice that we do have a little bit of starter code here. And we're going to get a little bit more in depth with that clear button later on. But for right now, we need to look at creating two additional variables other than the ones that we have, which is our global sum and global average. So the next variable that we're going to create is going to be our amount or our entry amount. And we're going to set that to an empty list. So we're going to take that initialized global name and let's go ahead and type in entry amounts. And from there, we're going to go ahead and set that to create an empty list. So once we go in there, we're going to make that the empty list. And then we're going to need to go and add another one, which is going to be the entry months. So doing the same thing, we're going to initialize our global name. Go ahead and call this one entry months. And from there, we'll go ahead again and duplicate that create empty list and add it in. So now we have a total of 4 different variables that we can use. And in our add button, we're going to be focusing on using that entry months and the entry amounts. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is find that add button on our left-hand side. And with that add button, what we're going to go ahead and do is bring up a when add button is clicked. So what do we actually want to have when the add button is clicked? Well, the first thing we want to do is add items to our list. That's the reason why we created a global variable and we set it to an empty list. So we're going to go ahead into our list view and we are going to look for this add items to list and then with the item underneath. Now we are going to need 2 of these because we're going to be doing this not only for the months but also for the amounts. So now that we have our add items to list, we have to identify which list do we want to use. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and grab our get variable and we're going to drop our entry months. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that and change that over to entry amounts. So we've now identified the 2 different lists that we're going to use here. Now with that list, we have to then look at what items are we using. Well, we know that with that entry months, we were using that month spinner. So we're going to go ahead and find that month spinner down the left-hand side. And once we do, we're going to go ahead and look for month spinner selection. Once you find that month spinner selection, that's going to basically add whatever month was selected from that spinner component. As for our global entry amounts, here we're looking for our amount text box. So as we go down, you'll notice that you have an amount text box, and we're looking for what is in that amount text box text. So we're not going to set anything here, so we're going to find that light green and drop that in. So whenever that add button is clicked, we are now going to basically add whatever is in that spinner or whatever is in that text box into our list. Now from there, we need to be able to go ahead and look at what is going to happen with that amount text box. Because once we hit add, whatever number is in that text box is going to remain there. So for example, if we have 10 patients and we put the number 10 and hit add, we're still going to see the number 10. So what we want to be able to do is basically set that amount text box back to being blank. So in order to do that, what we need to find is that amount text box. And this time we are going to go ahead and find the set amount text box text. And we're going to go ahead and set that to be blank. So once we do go ahead and click the add button, that number would disappear and we would be ready to add a new entry. Now what we want to look at here is how can we clean this up a little bit? For example, what if that amount text box is blank and somebody hits the add button? We want to call a notifier here that's going to let us that the data has been successfully added. So in order to do this, we can call on that notifier that we added. And with that notifier, what we're looking to do is show an alert. So we're going to go ahead and call that notifier show alert. And we're going to put a little notice in here. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that text box and drop it in. And for our notice, let's go ahead and type in something like data successfully added. That'll let us know that the data has been added to the list and we're good to go. So now what happens if the data isn't added to the list? In order to clean this up a little bit, we're going to go ahead and take what we've added and put this into more of a conditional format. So we're going to go up to our control structures and we're going to grab an if then else statement. Now with our if then else statement, we basically are going to have a condition, what is going to happen if that condition is met, and then the else statement would basically run if the condition is not met. What we're going to go ahead and do is take everything that we've already created for that add button and we're going to drop it in the else statement. Once we do that, we can drop our condition into the add button. So basically what we're looking for is if our data is going to be added, then our condition cannot be met. So the condition we're going to use for this is what happens if the amount text box is blank. So in order to do that, we're going to grab an equal sign. And here we're going to go ahead and find that amount text box again. And we're going to go down and find amount text box text. So now what happens if the amount text box text is blank? So we'll go ahead and grab another blank text box. Well, if it's blank, we want to send some sort of notification again. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate our notifier. And instead of saying data is successfully added, let's go ahead and say something like, please enter a number in the text box. Now this will show up on our screen and will let us know that there was no data entered for them to add. So again, if we go ahead and click on our add button and there is no data in there, we should see that message. So taking a look at our screen again in our text box here, if the number 1 is there and we do select a month and hit add, then that data should be stored. But if for some reason that text box is left blank, that's where we'll get that notification that we need to enter something into the text box. So that's what we can do as far as adding or programming our add button. Now that we have our add button programmed, let's go ahead and take a look at how that's actually going to function on our app. So let's go ahead and take a look at our app, and you can see here that we do have our month spinner set to January, and we can change that to whatever month that we want. Let's go ahead and say we want March, and then in our add box here we can go ahead and simply add a number. So let's say we add the number 4, we click the add button, and we get the message that the data was successfully added. Now what we notice here is that in no way do we actually see where that data has been stored, and that's going to be the next thing that we look at. But before we jump into that, let's go ahead and take a look at what happens when we hit the add button now when there's nothing in that text box. Here you'll see you now get that notifier that says, please enter a number in the text box. So we need a way to access that information. And what we're going to look at today is how are we going to be able to get that information to show up and where is it going to show up? So the first thing we're going to look at is we want to see total patients. So we want to be able to see that number increment as we keep adding, as well as what the average per month is. And then down here, you'll notice that we have this data list view. This is where all of the information is going to be compiled, month, how many people, things like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can actually program this. Now, one thing you'll notice is in that add button, I did go ahead and add this call screen to hide keyboard. That doesn't make it nice that once you hit that add button that the keyboard drops back down. A little bit of a nice functionality, and that can be found under your screen 1. You can simply drop that in if you would like to. Now for our show data button, we're going to basically use 3 procedures for this. So what we're going to go ahead and look for is what happens when that show data button is actually clicked. So we'll go ahead and find that show date button and bring that in, and we're going to create 3 procedures here. And for those procedures, we're going to create one that calculates the sum, one that calculates the average, and also one that takes all that information and displays it in that display data list. So the first thing we need to do is create a procedure. So we'll go ahead and create our first procedure, and we're going to go ahead and call this display sum. Once we have that display sum, we can go and create a second procedure, and that one is going to be called display average. And from there, we'll go ahead and create the third procedure, which is going to be display data list, since that's what we're going to be looking for here. Once you have those basically named, what we're going to look at doing next is adding those to that show data button. Now that we've created them, we can simply go ahead and grab them and drop them into that show button. Now, when we go ahead and drop them into that show button, we want to go ahead and basically add our sum. After our sum, we're going to go ahead and add the average. Then we can go ahead and add our display data list. And last but not least, let's go ahead back to that screen one and let's drop in a hide keyboard. Now your show data button is pretty much done, but we don't have anything in those procedures. So even if we tested our app at this moment, nothing is actually going to happen. So let's go ahead and focus on our sum first, because we can't really get an average unless we have the actual sum of our total patients. So we already have a global variable set up for our sum and average. So we're going to be utilizing them during this procedure. And the first thing we need to do is grab that variable, and we need to basically set that sum to make sure that we are at 0. So now that we are at 0, now we can go ahead and look at what is going to happen here. So we're going to go up to our control features here, and what we're going to look for is for each item we want this to do something. So for our item, we do have this local variable here that we're going to be utilizing. And what we're going to do with this is for each item in the list. Well, the list that we're looking for in this case is going to be our amounts list, whatever was actually entered into that entry amounts. So we're going to go ahead and grab that entry amounts list. Now that we've identified the list, we need to basically go ahead and write the function that would calculate the total sum. So in order to do that, we're going to grab our set variable, and we're going to grab the global sum. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is a little math, and we're basically going to get the global sum. So if we already have data stored, we're going to get whatever that data was, and we're basically going to get this item. So how do you get this local variable which is being stored? Is that we simply hover over it and we can get that item. So now that we have that, we're going to take our global sum and get that item that is being stored. And last but not least, the most important thing is we still need to be able to see this. So we need to find our total number label. Once you find that total number label, we're going to go ahead and basically set the text to get the global sum. So you want to be able to set the total number label, and we're going to go ahead and set that to get whatever our global sum is. That's where it will be displayed on our actual device. Now that we have our display procedure for our sum already wrapped up and everything is programmed correctly, the next thing to look at would be the average. So we already have a sum, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we would need to do in order for the average to be displayed. So here we do need to use an if then else statement, because we do need to have a condition here. So let's go grab our if then else. And with our if then else statement, the first thing we want to do is ask ourselves, is this list empty? If the list is empty, then we're not going to be able to get the average. So let's go ahead and take a look at our list, and what we're going to look for is one of these blocks that asks that, and is this list empty? And then we need to identify what that list is. So the list that we're looking for here is our global entry amount. So we have one right here that we can simply duplicate and drop it in. So now we are going to look in that entry amounts list to see what is actually there. If nothing is there, then we need to kind of send that notification out again. So let's go ahead and get another notifier here, and we can grab a text box, and let's let the person know that this list is currently empty. So no data for them to actually look at. Now with that, once that condition is not met, that's where we're going to look at calculating the average. And our average is really no different than finding the sum. We still kind of have to do pretty much the same thing, except a different operation. So the first thing we're going to need to do is go ahead and set our global average. So let's go grab our set block. We can grab our global average. And from here, we need to do a little division problem. So going back into our math, we can find that division block, and we're going to go ahead and get our sum. So we need to have that global sum. So we'll take whatever the global sum is, and we need to divide that by the length of the list in our entry amounts. So if we go into our list drawer, what we're going to look for is a length of list. So once you find your length of list, we need to then identify what list that is, and in this case, it's going to be the entry amounts again. So if there was a total of sum of 10 and there were 5 items in that list, then we would have an average of 2. Now again, just like we did with our display sum, we still need to set that to a label so that we can see that. So down towards the bottom, what we're going to start to look for is basically our average number label. Once we have that average number label, we're going to set the average number label text just like we did above. And this time we're going to go ahead and get the global average. So again, you can grab one of your variables and duplicate it. Just make sure you change it over to get global average. Now that you have that, your average should be ready to go. So the next step is going to be identifying this data list. And this is where it's going to compile everything together. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we need to round out our show data button. So the first thing we really need to do is grab that display data list variable. And if we look up at the top here, we've created a global sum, an average, an entry amount, and an entry months. We're going to need to go ahead and create a new variable here, and that is going to be called your display list. So with this, we're going to go ahead and add that display list. And with the display list, we're going to go ahead and create an empty list with this. So anytime our app is initialized, we're going to have an empty list. So with that, we're ready to go ahead and basically identify what has to be in this procedure. So first thing, let's go ahead and set that display list just like we did with the others. And we're going to go ahead and create an empty list. So once we get in there, our list is empty. And now we're ready to kind of go back, and very similar to our display sum, we're going to go back into our control. And we are going to look for a block that looks like for each index. So when we look at this, what we're looking for is some sort of index block. Now, we have a for each number. This is what we're kind of looking for, but my variable doesn't quite match up. So let's go ahead and bring that one in. And for this, let's go ahead and change the number. I don't want to use number. I'm looking more for the index or the positioning. So I'm going to go ahead and change that variable over for index so that we can go ahead and identify that. Now, just like we did with one of our activity 2.1 when we got into creating loops, basically that's what we're looking at doing, is having this run it for each position in our actual list. So our index starts from 1, and we're going to count by 1, but we're going to get rid of this number 5. Instead of using that number 5, what we're going to look for is creating the length of the list. So we want to look at our length of list, and the list that we're using for this one is our months. So we're going to go up to our variables, and we're going to go ahead and get our global entry months. Now that we have that list identified, we can go ahead and add specific items to that list. So let's go back into our list, and now we're looking for our add items to list. So now once you have that block, we're going to need to have a couple things added off to the side. The first being, where are we actually adding them to? Which list? In this case, we're going to be actually adding these to our display list. So we'll go ahead and copy the entry months and change that over to display list. We have our list identified, and now what do we want to add? So in this case, we're going to go ahead and grab a join block because there's a couple pieces of information we need to add here. The first thing we need to do is we only have 2 puzzle pieces. We're going to need to use that mutator tab and bring a new string in so that we have 3 pieces of information. The first thing we want to do is select a list item. So here we can go in and find our select list item list and its index. The list item that we are looking for, again, is going to be our entry months. And the index for this is going to be basically our local variable. So we could bring in that get index. From there, we're going to go ahead and add a text box. And with our text box, I'm going to go ahead and add a little space, followed by a colon, followed by a space. That'll give us a little bit of room. And then we can go and basically duplicate that select list item box. And in this case, we're going to change months over to amounts. Now that you have those done, the last thing we need to do is actually set the data list view. So we're going to go into our block view on the left hand side, and what we're going to look for here is our data list view. Once you have your data list view, we're looking for elements. So we want to set the data list view elements, and notice how this is going to be outside of our loop here. We want to be able to set that to get our variable, which is going to be global display list. Now you have all of your information stored, and if we were to go and check this out, we should be able to see that on our app. So let's go ahead and take a look at what our device looks like. And again, we've already gone ahead and entered information in there, but let's go ahead and say we change it over to May. Let's go and add another piece of data here and hit add. And now from there, if we go and hit that show data button, what we should see is we have a total of 10 patients. We have an average of 5 per month. We now have a breakdown that in March we saw 4 patients and in May we saw 6 patients. So now you have a way not only to add the information, but to also display that on your device. Now we've added a way to add and show our data within our app. The next logical step is being able to clear and remove that data. So in order to do this, let's go ahead and take a look at our app and see how it is functioning at this time. What we'll notice is that we do have our list view showing that March we had 4 patients and in May we had 6 for a total of 10 patients, and we're averaging 5 patients per month. Now we do have some starter code that's going to help us with this clear data button. And when we do hit that clear data button, you will notice that our patients goes back to 0, as well as our average per month, and the data list view is wiped out. Now the reason that that is happening is because we are simply just resetting the labels. If we go back and hit the show data button again, the data is not really being removed. We're just simply resetting what those labels are showing. So we need to go ahead and continue with that clear data button, as well as program that remove data button to actually get rid of what we have stored on our app. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can program the clear data button as well as that remove data button. So the first thing we're going to see is with this clear data button is we are simply only setting those labels or that data list view, that total number label, average number label, back to its current state. We also need to set the actual variables back to an empty list as well. So in order to complete this clear data button, we do need to go to our variables drawer, and we are going to need to bring in 3 additional variables. So we can go ahead and duplicate them a few times, and we're going to go ahead and set our entry months, our entry amounts, as well as our display list, and we're going to set all of those back to its current state. So by doing that, we can see what is going to actually happen now with our app. Our clear data button is programmed, and if we go ahead and take a look now, when we hit that clear data button, you're going to notice that that is wiped out as it was before. And when we hit the show data button, now it's telling us that our lists are currently empty. Now, what if we don't want to get rid of all of the data, but just simply one specific line? So for example, again, if we have May and we go ahead and enter some data, and then we go back to another month, we'll select August, enter more data, and show that data. Now we have May with 4 and August with 8. There's no way for me to actually clear out one of those months unless I clear out everything. So we're going to go ahead and use that remove data button to allow us to clear out a single line if we need to get rid of it. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and add a remove data button to our program here. So we're going to need to go ahead and find that remove data button, and we're going to go ahead and select what happens when the remove data button is clicked. Now for this, we are going to use a conditional statement. So we're going to use another if then else statement, and that's going to help us to identify a condition, and based on that condition we will get something to happen. So the first thing we want to do is basically what if nothing is actually selected? We accidentally hit the remove data button. We didn't actually select one of the indexes. Then we want to get some sort of message. So in order for this to happen, we're going to go ahead and grab our equal block. And what we're going to look for is the data list view, which we have down here at the bottom. And what we're looking for is the selection index. So we have the data list view selection index, and we're going to drop that down, and we're going to go ahead and say, what if it's equal to 0? Which basically means nothing is selected. Well, if nothing's selected, we're going to go ahead and call that notifier again to give us a message. And that alert is going to basically say something along the lines like, please select an item for removal. So we can go and add that text box in there. And once we have that text box in there, we can simply go ahead and type whatever message we want. So let's go ahead and put, please select an item for removal. So if nothing's selected, we should get that alert. Now, if there is something selected, we need to basically look at the display list, the months, and the amounts. So we need to go back into our list, and this time we're going to go ahead and look at removing a list item. So before we went ahead and added items, now we're going to go ahead and remove. And we're going to need to duplicate that 2 additional times because we're going to be going ahead and doing this for 3 different variables. The first variable we're going to go ahead and look at is we're going to go ahead and get our global display list. So we can go ahead and duplicate this while we're here and drop that into our other blocks. But we're going to go ahead and add our display list, followed by our months, followed by our amounts. Now that we have those lists identified and what we want to get out of there, the next thing we want to look at is the data list view selection index. So we can go right up here. We already have that block, and we can duplicate that so we have 3 additional blocks, and we can go ahead and drop that in. Now what that should do is get rid of that information. Now we do need to recalculate the sum and the average now because of removing an item from this list. So because we've created a procedure already, we could simply go ahead and call that procedure to happen. So we're going to call the display sum, and we're also going to go ahead and call that procedure, which is our average. Once we do that, we need to reset the data list view to display our current list. So from there, we're going to go down and grab that data list view, and we're going to go ahead and set the data list view elements and make sure that that goes in that else statement. And we're going to go ahead and set that to get our global display list. Now here we pretty much completed all the programming for our app. We'll take a look a little later at how to actually store this data in what we call a TinyDB, which means once that phone is shut down, we still can access that data. Right now, once we shut down our app, we're going to lose all of that saved data. But for right now, we can get a good idea of how this data is being stored. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the app may look like and whether or not it's actually going to keep that information. So at this time, we have that May 4th, we have that August 8th, and if we go ahead and clear that data out, it wipes everything. So again, if we go ahead and add some data here, so let's go ahead and add some. We'll change the month here. Let's go to November. We'll add some data, show that data, and now you see we have August 6th. We have November with 3, but let's say I want to go ahead and get rid of that August. If I click on that August, you'll notice that it'll highlight. And if I hit this remove data button, what it's going to go ahead and do is set my total patients back to 3, average per month is 3, November is 3, and if I want to go and add more information, I can't. But that's a way that you can get rid of each specific index rather than clearing out your entire data that has been stored. So for activity 2.4, we've learned a couple different things. We've learned how to add data, show data. We've even learned how to clear and remove it. When we get into the persistent data part of this in our next activity, we're going to look at how we can save information such as the clinic's name, address, phone number. We can use a little bit of media there that we can show and play different things. And then we'll be able to save that data on a TinyDB so that we can recall that data at any time. So that's it for your activity 2.4, the Disease Tracker app.